Hi, I'm Matt. I tweet quite a lot about chess on the Twitter handle above, which stands for Must I Lose to This Idiot? But I haven't recorded any videos before. I thought I'd just walk you through an interesting game I played the other day in the Twitter chess tournament. This is a tournament, sort of online, longish play tournament set up by Say Chess, and I'll put details for his website in the information section. Basically, there's 20 players in this tournament from around the world of varying strength, from ELO something like 1300 to 2000 plus, and so far it's been played in a really nice atmosphere with people watching and commenting on each other's games. So long may that continue. And there's been some quite interesting games, including hopefully the game that I played. So this was a 30-minute game plus 15 seconds per move, and played it on the 4th of April. My opponent was FH42, who was rated 1954 on Lichess. So I was white. I started with the move e4, which is what I always play, and my opponent played e6, French defense. I've always struggled a little bit to know what to play against the French defence. I've played all sorts of different variations. I think because I play it myself, so I know the pros and cons of the various plans for white. So I played d4, d5. Obviously, this is the sort of normal stuff. And I've landed in the last year or two on the Tarrasch, which is knight to d2. I like this because white gets a bit of a space advantage and gets a bit of play against black's bad bishop, which is stuck behind this pawn on e6, which is sort of typical of the French defence in general. The other options for white, the main ones in this position, are knight to c3, which I played quite a lot, particularly as junior, pawn to e5, so immediately sort of fixing the pawn structure in the centre here, or pawn takes pawn, which is the exchange variation. But yeah, I like knight d2. It's quite good fun to play, and it's quite easy to work out where the pieces go, I think, in the Tarrasch variation. So black plays knight to f6 in this position, which is the main line. The other major line in this position is pawn to c5. Which gives you some quite different positions, because typically the centre pawns don't get blocked so much. Knight f6, and then pawn to e5, which is a sort of typical push in the French. White gets a space advantage, but black can try to attack those pawns by playing his own pawns to c5 and to f6 at some point later on in the game. Opponent dropped back with knight f to d7. You can go forward with the knight, but it doesn't tend to end very well. It makes more sense to go backwards. Bishop to d3, pawn to c5, so as I mentioned, attacking that white pawn chain, so white has to defend it. And then knight to c6, again attacking on d4. So this is all pretty normal stuff. Now, this is a very typical Tarrasch move, is playing the other knight from g2 to g1 to e2. So the point here is really that the d2 knight ends up, so it's a bit in the way compared to the d2 knight is a little bit in the way compared to sort of the knight c3 lines. So it needs to get out of the way, and the most obvious place to put it out of the way is onto the f3 square, which means that you can't put the g1 knight onto the f3 square. You can play this way, knight to g3, but I don't like it so much, because the knight on d2 struggles to find a square, has to come out maybe onto the queen side, which is not necessarily the best place for it to go. Whereas in this line, it's obvious it's going to jump out onto f3 in a move or two. So my opponent played a6. That's quite a rare move, and I think this might be where my opponents have started to go a little bit wrong. There's a couple of other moves that are much more common. I'll show one in particular, which is quite fun. C takes d4, c takes d4, and then f6. So again, hitting at the pawn chain at the front this time, and black's got lots of pieces attacking on e5. So white plays e takes f6, and this line knight f3. Black here is trying to play pawn to e5 to free the position up, potentially at some point. The white takes off the bishop. The reason I'm showing this is because you get this fun exchange sacrifice for black, which looks a bit scary for white, but surprisingly it's okay for white. Yeah, that's the sort of line you need to be aware of if you're playing as white in the Tarrasch. The other move, if we go all the way back to the previous line, the other move that's played quite a lot is queen to b6. But yeah, a6. I'm not sure. I think that black's clearly trying to grab some space on the queen side, but he can't actually do anything concrete on the queen side really. So it feels like it might be a little bit of a waste of time. It looks quite nice, but it's not really getting to the heart of the position. So I played my knight to f3, just developing normally and hoping everything would hang together. My opponent plays consistently, sort of grabbing some space on the queen side. I'm not sure that it's necessarily the correct plan. So I just carried on developing, castled. And then my opponent played pawn takes pawn, which didn't feel quite right to me, because I thought that black wanted to keep the tension in the middle. I didn't think much of playing c4 either, because I can just drop back, and whilst this looks like something's happening for black on the queen side, he can't actually get any further where white can start pushing on the king side. Something like bishop b7 I thought was a fairly sensible move for black here, and something like pawn takes, bishop f4, just defending on e5, and then rook c8. I mean, I'd take white here because I think the pieces are slightly better positioned and white has a bit more space. Black's a little cramped, but I've played positions like this as black quite a lot, and it's not too terrible. So again, going back, black played pawn takes pawn, and obviously I took it back. One thing that black needs to be a bit careful of is this c6 knight, which is on prise here. So this will feature in a minute. And black played pawn to f6. Now this feels definitely wrong. This is mixing plans up. So he started pushing on the queen side rather than attacking in the center, but then starts attacking in the center anyway. I think again bishop b7 is probably a sensible move because he does need to defend this knight here. But I think white's got a very decent advantage here because this bishop's not actually going anywhere. It's stuck behind the d5 pawn, and white has a lot of space behind this strong pawn chain, which black can't really get at anymore. So here, I didn't miss the move here, but I played an alternative move which wasn't quite as strong. Can you see what in this position here before where black's played f6? Can you see what white can do here to take advantage of this loose knight? I'll do the classic King's Crusher thing of giving you 5 seconds to pause the video and have a think about it. Okay, and the move here, and I did actually play this move one move later, and I think it shocked the few spectators that were watching the game. The move is bishop takes h7. So black can't really leave it alone, because if he makes a developing move like bishop to b7, for example, then he just gets hit by bishop to g6. White's just picked up a pawn and messed up black's king position. So black must take this bishop. Now you get queen to c2, attacking both this knight on c6 and this rook that's just landed on h7. And one of those loose pieces will have to drop off the board. Rook h8, queen takes c6, and again we're hitting 2 pieces. It's another fork. Rook to b8, queen takes e6, and this is 2 pawns down already for black, and it's just horrible. I actually played knight to f4, which is a fairly typical move in the Tarash for white, attacking this weak pawn on e6. But yeah, it's not quite as good as bishop takes h7 straight away. So black played this knight to b6, defending the pawn on e6, which I'd seen. For some reason, I thought that the sacrifice with the bishop h7 was better in this line, because queen takes c6 comes with check, but it doesn't quite work out that way. So bishop takes h7, and then we get rook takes h7, queen to c2 with the same fork again. And then black played f5. Now queen c6 is the move that I played. So queen c6, and then bishop to e7 defends everything. So this knight's defended, this rook's defended, and this pawn's defended, where in the previous line you couldn't defend e6 as well as a8. But actually there's a really nice intermediate move that white can play here, which again, I'll give you 5 seconds to pause the video and see if you can find it. Okay, and the move here, which I think is fantastic, is knight takes e6. I didn't even look at this at all, but once you look at it, it's brilliant. The point is that queen c6 will come with even more force if the knight's taken. So we've got bishop takes e6, queen takes c6, then sort of the obvious one first. If you play queen to d7, you just lose that knight on e6. If you play bishop to d7, then this is actually checkmate. Queen to e6, threatening the rook on h7, which is more than good enough. Bishop g5, mate. And king to f7 is just horrible for black. So we have knight g5, king g8, queen e6, f7. So this is a typical maneuver where you get a smothered mate, but actually you don't even need to sacrifice the queen on g8 this time. So that's horrible. The best move, the best move is not to play bishop takes e6 after knight takes e6. But if you play, if you play queen d7 instead, unfortunately, this guy is weak. This guy is undefended. So knight f8, queen c5, and that is pretty much the end of the game. So unfortunately, I didn't play that. I played queen takes c6 straight away. Bishop d7, where everything is defended. So the queen has to. Well, I could go forward to b7, but it feels like the wrong way to go. I've won my pawn. I'll come back. Queen c2, rook c8, queen d1. I got to this point in my calculations in the game. I thought that I was a fair bit better, partly because of the extra pawn and partly because black's king's never going to be able to find a place to be. So sitting in the middle, and both the rooks have moved already. So my opponent now played g5, which is an interesting idea. I think the idea here is, well, he's lost this h pawn, but he's gained an open file. So what he wants to do is at some point to try and get some pressure on the king's side by doubling up the queen and the rook and see what happens over here, which makes sense. So I thought for quite a long time here, and then I decided to take the plunge by playing my knight into e6. So this opens the king's position up even more and gives me 3 pawns to the piece. I also wanted to give the spectators something fun. There were sort of 6-7 people watching the game, even if it wasn't quite sound. But I thought this was the right move, and I thought that I was a fair bit better. So bishop e6, knight g5. So this is forking the rook and the bishop. They're both undefended. There's 2 ways that that black can defend, and he decided to come rook e7. So here I can just play, if I want to, just play knight takes bishop, rook takes, queen to h5 check, king d7, and then queen takes f5, and I've now got 4 pawns for the piece. But I thought what I wanted to do instead, this kind of leaves black maybe with some chances because he's got an extra piece, and I'm not threatening anything immediately. I thought that his pieces are a bit tied up. His king's badly placed, his pieces are all in the back rank. This rook on e7 has to stay defending the bishop, so why not just try and get my other 3 pieces. So currently I'm kind of playing with my knight and then sort of threats with the queen. If I get my other 3 pieces into the game without black managing to do anything, then I'm just going to win. So I played bishop d2. The other option, which I thought of, was to play b3, and that's a slightly better move, I think, with ideas of playing so bishop to a3, threatening this rook, or a4, breaking up the queen side. So bishop d2, and the idea really is that I'm going to come in here. I'm going to come in here with my queen. I'm going to put a rook onto c1 and see what happens. My opponent thought for a bit of a while here, and he played queen to d7, which is a bad move because it blocks off the king's best escape square, which means that queen h5 in a second comes with even more force than it would have done before. What he should have done was play king to d7, so running out of the way straight away. The move here for white, which is quite nice, I think, is a4, so breaking up the queen side and coming in to attack the king even more. So if you play knight takes a4, b3, and then the rook comes into the position. Instead, if black plays pawn takes, then white plays queen to e2, threatening a6, queen c7, and then queen takes a6. I hadn't actually seen this idea in the game, but I might possibly have done, I think, if black had played king d7, because I'm always looking for something to open the position up in this kind of scenario. So we'll go back. Black played queen to d7, played queen to h5 check. So now black's doing pretty badly here, actually. So if we play king to d8, we'll see what black actually played in a second. Then white can play rook a c1, something like knight c4, bishop to b4, threatening the rook to e8, bishop f8, rook f8, now b3, knight b6, and now queen h6, and black's just losing pieces in this position, and there's not a great deal that he can do. So something like rook e8, queen f6, rook e7, and now white can black can't actually do anything at all. White can just push this h pawn down the board and win pretty quickly. But what black actually played, which looks fairly logical, is bishop to f7. But he missed a fairly nice but simple tactic in this position. So again, 5 more seconds, and what did white play here? Okay, so I played knight takes bishop, which seems like a bad idea, swapping off my good knight for his not particularly good bishop. But there's a tactical idea here. Rook takes f7, and then on to e6. So I'm threatening to take the rook, I'm threatening to take the queen, and you can't play queen takes pawn, unfortunately, because either rook comes to e1, and then you've got a horrible pin on the queen, and you just win lots of material here as white. So my opponent here played queen to b7, but it's just losing a whole rook. Pawn takes, queen takes, and the rest is fairly simple. Rook fe1, bishop d7, blocking the check. Now I played so any move wins here. So I can play queen h6 or queen h3 or queen f3 or anything. But this move is the best in this position. Rook takes e7. So I spent a little bit of time calculating that this was the winning move. king takes e7, rook to e1, check. Here's king can't step to the d file because it's defending the queen. It has to stay attached to the queen. So we go king f8. I spent quite a bit of time in this position trying to find a mate, but I couldn't find a checkmate. There is a mating line here. It's mating 9, the computer says, which goes queen h8, queen g8, bishop comes in, b4 check, king f7, queen comes to h5 check. So you have to be fairly precise here. White's winning anyway. Rook to e7 check. I missed this move. I did get to this position, but I've somehow missed rook e7. King f6, queen h6, queen g6, rook e6, rook e6, queen g6, and queen e7 mate at the end. Is nice enough. But in this position, as I said, I spent a little bit of time trying to find a checkmate. Couldn't find an immediate one, which it wasn't as obvious as I thought it might have been, and just played queen h6, which is a final fork on the queen and the knight. King g8, queen takes b6, and I'm a piece and lots of pawns up, and my opponent resigned at this point. So I really enjoyed playing this game. It seems like it's a really fun tournament. So yeah, thanks to Say Chess for organising it, and thanks to FH42 for a good game. And hope you enjoyed it. Let me know if you have any questions. Thanks.